Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today. Laura Fitzgerald, I'm the State House reporter for CAP Radio, but before that I staffed elections in the State Assembly for about 6 years or so, this is a full circle moment for me. I'm excited to be here. Just want to go ahead and introduce our panelists very briefly. We have Jana Lean, who's the Chief of the Elections Division of the Office of the California Secretary of State. Kim Alexander is President of the California Voter Foundation. Jesse Salinas is the Assessor, Clerk Recorder, Registrar of Voters for Yolo County. And Natalie Adona is the Nevada County Clerk Recorder and Registrar of Voters. Thank you guys so much for being here today. And just as a reminder, these are all subject matter experts. They have very extensive bios. Encourage you to check that out online in the panel materials. But in the meantime, we'll go ahead and get started with the discussion here. And my first question is for Jesse and Natalie, our elections officials. We are just a few weeks out from another major election. What can voters expect before then, and what do they need to know? So how can voters register to vote for first-time participation, or how can they double-check their existing registration?
So what you can expect? Well, I think the most immediate thing that you can expect is that your ballots are dropping in the mail very soon. So we've got to make sure that your ballots are in the mail on or before October 7th. Check it out and make sure that your registration is up to date. You can do that very easily online. If you're already registered, it's voter status at sos.ca.gov. If you are still not registered, there is still time, but you will not get a ballot right away. We have sent those lists of voters weeks in advance, so we'll get you in some of our supplemental mailings, or you could very likely, depending on where you're at, stop by the elections office and register and sort of pick up a ballot sort of fairly quickly if you go to your local election official. I would say that other things that you should expect is that our offices are going to try to wall off all of the politics of the election. All we really want is to know whether you're registered and whether you got a ballot, whether you turned in that ballot, so we can make sure that we sort of have everything that we need to make sure that this election runs smoothly. You can also expect that we have done a lot of planning up to this point, and I think that we are very prepared for a smooth, well-run election here in California.
Yeah, and well said. I think one of the things to keep in mind too is, as was shared, folks have already registered for the most part. But you can register up until October 21st, so we can still get you a mailing. Of course, because of the CVR, the conditional voter registration, people can actually vote even on election day and actually register and vote on election day. So there is a spectrum of possibilities, but this first mailing that Natalie talked about, it's going to hit, I know for Yolo County, it will hit the West Sacramento Distribution Center on October 7th. That is the target date that it gets distributed, and so folks will start to see it a few days afterwards. But of course, a lot of folks have already started to receive their voter information guide, both from the state and from local registrars. So we've got a lot of moving parts that are still happening right now. And the other thing is you can go to register to vote. There is no .sos on that one, just registertovote.ca.gov, so you can do it online. Of course, there's also, besides our office, we know that post offices and libraries provide this information for you to get the paper. Some people like to actually still do the old school way and do the paperwork, and so that's an option available for folks as well.
So I want to stick with the issue of voter registration for just another moment here. As many people in this room probably know, Governor Gavin Newsom signed a statewide ban on voter ID requirements. This is after the city of Huntington Beach tried to enact a law of that nature. And I'm wondering, and it seems like there may be some interest in this based on the prior discussion, but I'm wondering, if you do have access to these government documents and identification numbers, you can volunteer them to register to vote. And how is that information used to verify voters? And then what can voters expect if they don't have access to those types of documents? And what's the process like for verifying and registering those voters?
When you register to vote, you're asked to give us quite a bit of information, like, your full legal name, the place where you live, and there's a couple of options for an identification. Most people provide their state-issued ID, like a driver's license number, or they will provide their last four of the social security number, maybe both sometimes. If you don't have either of those things, you will be assigned a HAVA ID by the Secretary of State's office. And we use all the information on the affidavit of registration to verify that you are the person who returned that ballot. If it's by mail, we'll compare signatures. If you vote in person, I know that we check the roster and make sure that everything balances out. So that the accuracy of your voter registration is very, very important. That's why you should always check your voter registration often, especially when you move or you have some sort of life change.
Yeah, and I would just add that our process for verifying signatures and comparing that we do is pretty significant. So and we can talk a little bit more about that process, I think, moving forward. But we take diligent care on providing training to our staff that reviews it, and there's a series of double checks, even triple checks to a certain extent, of how we review those signatures to make sure that they're valid.
So fast forward to the days and the weeks after the election, what's the process like for counting ballots? I think lots of folks expect to know the outcomes of certain races on election night, and we know that that isn't usually how it ends up happening. So it takes much longer, and why is that? And I'll open this up to all of our panelists.
Well, I'll go ahead and start. So one of the things that we encounter is people want to know what the final results are on election night. And because California's process allows for a lot of vote by mails to arrive on election day, because the majority of our ballots actually arrive by mail on election day. And then there's also this element where up to 7 days later, there can be ballots, as long as they're postmarked, can arrive into our office, plus others that are transferred over from counties. So those processes take time. After that, there's also the provisional process that we have to go through, that we have to first review all the vote by mails before we even start the provisional process. So when you look at it, there is an extension that takes place. And of course, there's some legislation that just recently passed that said we're not going to be able to certify until the 28th day. So there is a series of items that take place. And so for folks to understand, when we talk about reviewing, for example, the signatures, there is, in Yolo County, I'll give an example of that, there's a machine that actually provides about 20 to 25% verification of those comparable signatures to make sure that they align with what's in the data. Beyond that, we then have to have at least two individuals go through and review the next level signature, as legislation also just passed on this matter that we have to have two sets of eyes looking at these signatures. So in our office, we even have like a third set of eyes just to compare, to make sure if there's a challenge that we have another set that goes through before we actually reach out to the voters. So there's a lot of diligence, and everybody who reviews these signatures are trained thoroughly on how to review the signatures and verify that they're accurate. So there's a reason why there's an ongoing kind of delay on the final certification, because this process has to go through thoroughly each of these stages to be able to do that.
And I will say that, in California, we have the sort of great advantage of being able to process and sort of count vote by mails prior to election day. So, what I tell people is, look, we might not know all of the final results right now, but we do have a great number of ballots that are already counted. So in the last election, I think we had something like 37,000 total vote by mail. Nevada County has 75,000 registered voters. So we were able to count by election night about 20,000 of those, and the rest of them were dropped off on election day. And as Jesse alluded to, we don't just receive an envelope and take the ballot out and then start counting it. yeah, that would make it a lot faster, but that would be really careless, right? Because we do have to have rigorous chain of custody. No one is verifying signatures on their own. Nobody is handling ballots on their own, and it goes through a sort of very regimented, tight process from the time we receive a ballot with an envelope in it to the time that we are able to prepare it for tabulation. This is a very different kind of processing compared to in-person voting, where the voter, I mean, if you've ever gone to a polling place, you state your name and address, you get a ballot, vote that ballot, the machine makes a pleasant noise when you submit that ballot and you get your sticker, and then you're on your way. Vote by mail is, sort of very lengthy, and because we've got so many that arrive on election day, they do take time.
The California Voter Foundation is going to launch a project this election, which we did as a pilot project in 2022. It's called the Close Count Transparency Project, and what we're going to do is shine a light on those competitive congressional and legislative races that are too close to call on election night and the weeks following the election, to help people track how many ballots have been counted, what the margin of difference is between the candidates, and then how many ballots remain to be counted, because this has become the new normal in California. Starting around 2018, we started to see more ballots being counted after election day than on election night, and we've seen that continue. In 2020, during that election, the national news media was commenting frequently about California and why is it taking so long. In 2022, our close congressional races resulted in, we had 6 close contests that were too close to call that determined the fate of the balance of power in the House of Representatives. And that's likely to happen again. So while people are like, oh, nothing's happening in California, it's not competitive for the presidential election, it's really competitive for congressional races. And I want to talk a little bit about why this count is taking longer, because as Jesse and Natalie explained, yes, we have had this dramatic shift to vote by mail, and it takes a lot longer to process those ballots, especially when our beloved voters wait until the last minute and turn in their ballots on election day or get them postmarked on election day, and it creates this giant mountain of paperwork that our election staff have to diligently process and carefully process. So we don't want them to rush it, but the thing you have to know is that that's not the only thing that's changed. Eric McGee talked about some of the election reforms that have taken place over the last decade, and those have also shifted a lot of ways that we count ballots. We now have, because of independent redistricting, more competition. Our political districts are more competitive than they used to be. And because of top 2, we have closer results. We no longer have minor party candidates in the general election creating a buffer between the Republican and the Democrat. So you have these razor thin margins. They're too close to call. Why? You don't know where those uncounted ballots are. You don't know what precincts they're in. They're coming in these giant piles, and they have to all be sorted into precinct, or they're coming from vote centers, and those are also not precinct based. So it used to be that you could say, oh, well, here's CD 13, and it's made up of these counties, and we haven't counted the ballots in these precincts, and we know how the voters in those precincts vote, so we can predict the outcome. We can't do that anymore. Everybody's left in the dark. So our project is going to track how many ballots are uncounted in each county that makes up these close contests, and help people follow day by day what the results are. And this is going to help a number of things. Number one, we hope it will alleviate some of the pressure on our elections offices, this is the dangerous window of time. People are worried about the potential for political unrest, political violence. What we've seen is this post-election window is when our election staff are at the greatest risk, and they need the most support and protection. So I hope people will remember that as we think about what happens in the weeks following the election. We also want to capture day by day where that count is, because ballot counts are like a river. They're not static, and nobody's preserving where it is day by day. So without this preserved window where the count stood, the count is subject to mis and disinformation and fraud, and we've seen plenty of that and people making false claims. So come visit calvoter.org in the weeks following the election. We'll help you follow it, and we're also going to help the media understand some of these more subtle but important developments and changes in how we're actually conducting elections that are resulting in, yes, longer vote counts, but also more competition and closer contests. And all of that is combining to put this pressure on and having us all be a lot more patient than we want to be.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
So I get that question all the time. Why does the canvass take so long, right? And it takes so long because we actually diligently look at every ballot that's turned in to make sure that everyone can be enfranchised, right? And so there are a lot of ballots that are turned in on election day, and then also ballots that just, as they're going through the process, potentially need to be what we call cured, right? There could be a missing or a mismatched signature on a vote by mail ballot envelope as they're doing the comparison. Well, folks now have the ability to take the time to get that signature cured, right? So they have all the way up to 28 days because of the new legislation to 26 days, but okay, so they have to get the information in order to have their ballot actually counted. And that's something that I think California really takes very seriously, is to make sure that everybody who casts a ballot has an ability to have their ballot counted through the process, right? So if they're eligible and they actually have all the information they need and they can be processed by the county, and the county needs to take that time to do it. And so there is information, and I'm going to give a plug for our Secretary of State's webpage. We have a election results webpage that we do every day, update with the most recent results from all 58 counties. But then we also have an estimate of how many ballots are left to count. We call it our unprocessed ballot estimate. To at least give folks an idea of how many potential ballots are still out there to be processed. And that is a really good estimate, so folks know, as Kim is saying, when they have these races that are so close, which we never want a close race, right? You want wide margins. You want to make sure that everybody is really, not only concerned, but that they really understand that we are trying to do everything we can to make sure that every vote can be counted.
And if I may, just to dovetail on these comments, that when I first came into office in 2016, we would do a weekly update. Well, now we do it twice a week because voters want to know on a more current basis what's happening with these races. So we'll do it twice a week, and we'll announce the time period of when it's going to be published, and we'll put it out there. One of the things that's actually confused some people is that they see the 100% reporting precincts at the end of election night and saying, oh, you're done. No, that's just election night results. It's not including the canvass and the ongoing collection of counting the votes that we still have to process moving forward. So we've tried to be very clear in our verbiage on our website to clarify this is just election night results. It is still a process called canvassing that we need to do before we finally certify, and we'll have these weekly, bi-weekly, these twice a week updates that you'll see on these specific days and times when we'll publish that, so people can tune in, because our website gets a lot of clicks on those dates.
So thanks everybody for that. Kim, my next question's for you. And our state is home to so many different electoral processes. And what can voters expect when it comes to technology? And more specifically, what about voters who've recently moved from one county to another county and are now maybe going to be navigating a potentially different electoral process? What can you say to those voters?
Well, first of all, I'm happy to say to all California voters that you all have a paper ballot. We don't have paperless electronic voting in the state anymore, thank goodness. And most states followed California's lead and also shifted to paper ballots. We have accessible voting machines all across the state, so no matter what county you're in, if you need an accessible voting device, you can use one at any polling place or vote center in the state. So those things are universal. Other rights that are universal for all California voters, you have the right, as Jesse mentioned, Eric mentioned earlier, you can vote in your county election office any time during business hours if that's what you want to do. So even if you have a vote by mail ballot or you're in an all vote by mail county, you have that right to go vote in person. Everyone has the right to vote in person on election day from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. Everyone has the ability and will be sent a vote by mail ballot. So we have a lot of elements of uniformity. We also thankfully have achieved every county has at least one drop box. Some have more than others, but we have now everyone has the ability to use a drop box in every county. So where you see the variation is in the in-person voting options. And we have, this was discussed earlier, a little over half the counties are now Voters' Choice Act counties. The other half are traditional polling place counties. Then we have a couple of very small all vote by mail counties. And if you are in a Voters' Choice Act county, you have fewer fewer voting, you don't get to vote somewhere right next to your house, but you have more places you can vote and you have more days that you can vote. If you're in a polling place county, you can only vote in person at your local polling place. So that's a big difference, and it's hard for people to wrap their head around that sometimes. You know, you could, and one of the challenges with the Voters' Choice Act model is that you have counties in the same, you know, media market that are doing different things. So you can't really, you know, have a local TV station to say it's going to be like this for everyone. So we always encourage people to read your voter information guide. The information will be in there about what your voting options are, and to remember that you have those rights that Jana was explaining when you vote by mail. No matter what county you're voting in, you do want to check and make sure that you've signed the ballot envelope. Those signatures, as Jesse and Natalie said, are very carefully checked. When you sign the roster, when you vote in person, that signature, no matter where you're voting, is not verified the same way a vote by mail ballot is when you vote remotely, but it is, you do sign under penalty of perjury. So people who are thinking, oh, that's not secure, that's a pretty big deterrent for people to try to go and impersonate somebody else. And that's why we just don't see that happening. But you can use drop boxes, you can vote by mail. And our advice also is, you know, we're hearing messages from the USPS about postal delays. And so, yes, you have the right to mail your ballot on Election Day, but really don't wait until Election Day to put your ballot in the mail. And if you really are going to wait to the last minute, don't drop it in a mailbox that's already had the mail collected, because it will be too late. And as Jana mentioned earlier, we do still have, despite all these reforms that we've passed, we still see a high number of rejected ballots. You know, 1% to 2% of the ballots cast in the state end up not being counted, and it's really heartbreaking. Despite all the remedies and efforts that we've made to reduce that rejection rate, it's one of the reasons why we need to make sure that people know they have the in-person voting option, no matter what county they're voting in, because vote by mail is not something everybody is comfortable with, and we want to make sure voters know they have that right too to vote in person if that's what they want. Another thing that counties are doing that varies from county to county, and I would like to see this also done more consistently, is there's now an optional law that allows counties to accept voters' vote by mail ballots at polling places and get them scanned and counted on the spot at a voting site, which is very satisfying for the voter. They don't have to wonder whether their signature is going to get verified, and it speeds up the ballot processing for election officials who have one less ballot envelope they have to open, you know, verify the signature before opening, extract the ballot, flatten it out, deal with coffee that's spilled on it or whatever issues that they have. So we hope more counties will look at implementing that new reform that allows for actual scanning and converting of vote by mail voters back into in-person voters if that's what they prefer.
Mm-hmm. So just zooming out a little bit, Jana, I'm wondering if you can speak to how the Secretary of State's office supports local counties in administering elections, and what goes well, and then what are some of the challenges on the flip side?
Well, we are in constant communication with all 58 counties, probably more than they even want. But we are constantly talking with them. We make sure that we provide them with security training and other training. We do a lot of publications to assist with poll workers and poll worker training. But we saw this year, and we've seen it over the last few years, is there's the distrust of elections. Right, so I think that's one of the biggest things we're going to face here is the distrust of elections, and unfortunately some election officials. So we want to make sure that folks know that in here in California, actually across the nation, elections are run with integrity, that democracy is still alive, that people have an ability and a right to cast their ballot. So I think that's one of the big things that we have seen. We are worried about misinformation and disinformation that's out. We've always had certain campaigns, even forever, some propaganda that's out there that can put out information. But now we've seen a big, huge jump in a lot of dis and misinformation. So one of the things we've been working really closely with county elections on is to come up with different campaigns, social media campaigns, press kits, different things that we can make sure to get the information out to go to a trusted source, that their county election official is that trusted source. And then also, they need to trust the people, if they're going to give somebody their vote by mail ballot, to trust that person, to not just hand their vote by mail ballot to just anybody, right? And they want to make sure that everybody has the right to return that ballot on their their own behalf, that they have these options that Kim were talking about, that everybody will be mailed a ballot, right? All active registered voters in California will be mailed that ballot, but it's their choice on how they choose to enfranchise themselves. We also have a lot of information. We work really closely with county elections officials to collect all of their voting sites locations and early voting sites locations and drop boxes. So it's all in one spot. We have a couple tools that are available to voters. There is the My Voter Status tool where folks can look up and see where they can either drop off their vote by mail ballot, go to early voting, or their actual voting location on election day. So we work really closely with counties to make sure we can get all of that information in. We put up information 30 days before the election on our website, and I keep pushing people to our website, sos.ca.gov. So we have a lot of great information. But that early voting site goes up at 3 at E-30. I know I always talk about E-. We talk about that as how many days from the election. So 30 days before the election. We really encourage folks to take a look at that so they know as soon as they have that ballot in their hands, don't wait, don't procrastinate. As soon as you get it, we ask folks to utilize that vote by mail ballot and use all the information that's sent to them. We work closely with the county elections officials, not just on making sure to promote their county voter information guide, but the Secretary of State is required, and we do a pretty good job, I think, of putting out this huge book, we're going to call it that, the State Voter Information Guide. And it has information pages to voters just about what their rights are. It also has information on all the propositions that they're going to vote on, and it has information about their state candidates. So all of the local candidates, such as Assembly, a Senate, and any kind of jurisdictional candidates are in the County Voter Information Guide. We try to make sure that when folks have information that they need, they come to the trusted sources, and we're really pushing that campaign to, before you click, take a moment, think about what your source is. So I think that is one of the things that we're really trying to help and support the counties. And we work as a great partnership because we couldn't do it without each other. We provide a lot of guidance on laws, and there's a lot of interesting questions that come up, but we try to make sure that we put some uniform guidance out to all 58 county elections officials.
Mm-hmm. And then what are some of the challenges with that role of being the statewide supporter?
Well, we are getting a little bit bigger staff, but we do not have the staff of even some of the larger registrars of voters' offices. But we do make sure that we are available, and we're constantly, like I said, communication with the counties. We do want to make sure that folks feel secure when they go to the polling locations, and that county elections officials feel secure. So harassment in elections and political discourse will always happen. We do not want, though, our county elections officials or our poll workers or our office to feel like they're under harassment and can't do their job. And it's a tremendous job of making sure democracy runs forward so that everyone feels safe, everyone has the ability to cast their ballot, and to do it and know that there's integrity behind it.
So back over to you, Jesse and Natalie. I'm wondering, as we've been talking about and alluding to, we're living in a really tense political climate, especially for elections officials and elections in general. And I'm wondering, what specifically are election officials doing to mitigate these potential risks to your county's electoral processes?
So I'll go ahead and start. So for us, we've done some simple things. It seems simple, but it's significant. So we recently transitioned to a .gov website so that people understand when they go to yolocounty.gov, it is a source they can trust. Before that, we are .org, and I pushed about a year and a half ago telling the county, you have to move this because we need to have that sense where the community reaches out and they know that we are a trusted website. So that's one step that we've done. We've also had to actually put some securities around the entrance of our elections office. Before this past election, we really didn't have it. We had a little sliding door, it was about 3 feet high, that anybody could just walk in, and staff was with all of the rhetoric that's happening out there, staff was feeling uneasy. So we made sure that we were able to tap into, thanks to good work from Secretary of State's office. And yes, Jana and I are on speed dial on a regular basis, and they're great partners. We were able to tap into some state and federal dollars to be able to put some greater securities in place. And so, but we made it with plexiglass, so people can still see everything. And we still encourage people, if you want to come see, absolutely, we invite you in. And I think that's part of where there's, I think, a lot of fear on people's point in this. A lot of it is the unknown, right? They hear things and they've heard misinformation, disinformation, and they don't believe it. So we invite them to come see it firsthand. I know for myself, the past 3 years, I've had some, I will call people that had some real concerns, I'll put it that way, about our election process on our grand jury. So I've gone through that process and I invite them in. And if you were to go online, take a look at Yolo County's last 3 grand jury reports, and they've been very positive, saying, okay, they're transparent. There are all these issues and concerns that people have expressed. We don't see them. And so that's part of how you break down those fears and concerns, is that you open yourself up to show people. And if people are willing, I'll be candid, not everybody's willing to, even when you show them, to believe what you're showing them. But those who are actually open to hearing the information actually have been some of my biggest supporters. They came in doubting it, and now they go, oh, you mean the scanners and the tabulators are not connected to the internet, so nobody can hack it? And they walk away going, I had no idea. And I had no idea how complex the elections process is, and we walk them through it all, answer their questions, and they've been some of my biggest advocates when they started, when they walked in not sure, and now they actually promote it. But you have to be able to overcome the misinformation, and the best way to do it is just being open and transparent and sharing the information with individuals.
Yeah, I 100% agree with everything that Jesse just said, and I think that we're sort of living in this time where the elections officials, we're kind of the referees in a way, but people want to make us into they want to put us on a team. And we're sort of trying to sort of prepare voters not only with nonpartisan information that they can rely on, and I think the .gov is one of the key parts of that, but we're also doing a lot of back end planning, and I think a lot of my peers sort of are doing the same thing, where we are strengthening our partnerships with local law enforcement, and state and federal authorities on one, what is out there, and two, what we can do. For the first time in my county, we were able to organize a county tabletop exercise specifically focused on elections and sort of testing out our contingency plans for what you might do if you get a suspicious package in the mail, for example, or what to do when there's a lot of unrest at a voting location. So having that opportunity to actually sit down with our staff and with other partners within the county and within the community on, okay, well, here's something that we are all, sort of deeply invested in and have some concerns about, well, what are our plans and how can we improve upon those plans? So we have done, sort of quite a bit of that in my county and, also statewide. We've also ramped up our communications like, never before. When I first started in elections as a temp, sort of years ago, the sort of measure of success was don't make the front page, don't be controversial, just, sort of go about your business and then, everything will be just fine. Well, now the expectation is that we actually do, sort of explain what it is that we are doing in our offices, and observation is one of the key things, but also having a communications plan and being able to sort of proactively say to voters, here is what we are doing, here's why you can trust that elections are free and fair, and if you still don't believe us, then sort of come into our office. We've also set up sort of live stream in our ballot room, so people who can't make it out to our office can actually see what it is that we are doing. We are have two-person verification for all steps of the process, that we are sort of being very open about what it is that we're doing. And I do have to say that when people actually come in and see, get their questions answered, by and large, they're very thankful and did not realize how much went into that process.
Yeah, Kim, I want to give you a chance to answer too. What can leaders and experts do to build trust in the election systems?
Yeah, thanks. I just want to highlight that I've been working in voting technology and election security for 25 years, and I never imagined that election security would include keeping the personnel who run our elections safe. But that is what it includes now, and something that we all are stakeholders in. I just want to congratulate our registrars, our Secretary of State's office, and everybody that's worked so hard to keep this process safe and secure, including law enforcement groups. It is a different environment. There is, you cannot deny there's been a rise of political violence and threats to public officials and election officials in this country in the last few years. But our election sector has responded to the threat with these additional measures that have been taken with additional support from the Secretary of State's office. I do wish there would be more support forthcoming for election administration and election security from the federal government and from the state government. We do get some support periodically from the state legislature, but it's intermittent, and there needs to be consistent, reliable, dependable funding from the state and federal government, which depends on local governments to put on state and federal elections and basically does not ever pay their fair share of those costs. So it's remarkable that our elections are as safe and secure as they are, despite the fact that they have been chronically underfunded. So I just want to put a shout out for that, and also for everyone in the room who is concerned about this, to remember, if we despair, then we all lose. We cannot let anyone be cowed into being fearful about not voting. People need to make sure that we are not being overly fearful or worried, and to know that election officials have taken steps. In fact, 92% of election jurisdictions in this country have taken steps to make the process and their offices more secure since 2020, according to a Brennan Center report. So please know that that the process will be safe and secure, and also that you can all do your part to support our election officials by celebrating Election Hero Day, which is the day before Election Day, which is on Monday, November 4th. You can take flowers or cookies to your elections office. You can bring things to your poll workers. Even just saying thank you to the people who are working at a voting site really goes a long way. So I hope that you will all not only do that, but encourage your friends, family, and coworkers to join in this national civic holiday, because I think it can really help boost the spirits of the people who are doing this incredibly hard work under circumstances none of us ever anticipated. And yet they continue to do it, because when you are an election geek, that's what you do. And that's what I think probably everyone in this room is. So I just want to say thank you for that. And I hope everyone can also lend a hand to be supportive of the people who administer our elections.
So I know we're running a little behind on time here, but I just have one question for our entire panel here, and then we'll open it up to the room and those watching online. But I guess we can start with Jana and kind of work down, but what's your job when it comes to increasing participation in elections? And what kind of outreach are you doing, and what are some of the results?
Well, the results are harder to measure, and I think that's why we have some of our great researchers here. But we do a lot of voter education and outreach to folks. We have different programs like the pre-registration program, the high school voter registration program. We also just launched one with businesses. It's called Promote the Vote. We're trying to get information out to different business organizations to let their employees know about not only their rights, but also their responsibility for, really being active and taking their part to be a registered voter and encouraging that. We have lots of voting materials. The voter information guide is one of those, but we got to get folks to actually register to vote to do that. And I think, as Eric was talking about earlier, I think automatic registration has absolutely helped with that. But we do attend a lot of outreach events to try to make sure that we are on the grassroots and getting, really partnering with different organizations and community groups to get the word out, to try to get folks really excited about participating and becoming lifelong voters.
I think that it's important for people to realize that not everybody's starting at the same place. And, and also that vote by mail is as accessible as it is, it's not familiar to a lot of young people. Young people they don't use the mail. So, people don't like to do things they feel they're not good at. And I do worry that voting is one of those things that people look at the vote by mail envelope and all the instructions, what they need to do to complete that properly, and then also all their ballot choices, and that can get very intimidating. So I really encourage people to help those around you. Let them know you don't have to vote on everything on the ballot. It's not a contest. The important thing is to be a voter. And I always love it when people have ballot parties and do fun things around the election. Ballot parties are a great way to sort of divide up the work and get people together to go over your choices together. I see a couple of people nodding in the room if you've ever done one. I'm always looking for ways to make the election fun and engaging, and I think we all need to do that. This election especially, if you listen to the national news, watch the TV, it's like people, are hysterical all the time, and it's not healthy. And so, I think it's important to bring it back to what it's really about, which is we have this phenomenal right to express our opinions in secret with no coercion and use our freedom of speech. It is something that people all over the world envy. And so I think that just reminding people about how precious this is and helping one another could really go a long way to boosting voter turnout.
Jesse and Natalie?
So we have a multi-tiered approach in Yolo County. One is actually last night I was reviewing a press release where we are partnering with the Public Defender and Probation's Office to be able to get the word out in terms of their eligibility to be able to vote. And so we have that partnership that's at multiple sites across the county. So that's an exciting new endeavor that we've embarked on. We also, and I want to give a shout out to Mindy, because when I first came into office, I saw the data points on young people that Mindy started showing, those 18 to 25-year-olds, right, that are just underrepresented in the election process. And I thought to myself, okay, how do we fix that? And I started to develop a program that's called the Youth Empowerment Summit. And what it does is it brings over 100 kids across Yolo County to sit down with local elected officials. In fact, last week we had our 7th annual Youth Empowerment Summit. We had over 100 kids from across the county. All the high schools were represented, and they got to sit down with over 25 local elected officials to talk about issues that they care about. We gave them a mock election. We then had data that asked them questions from national, of that 18 to 25-year-old group, some questions like should AI, concerns related to AI. And we had the data that was there and compared their actual ballot. It looked like an official ballot. We designed it to look like an official ballot. They got a chance to vote in a voting booth. They then, during lunch, we scanned the results, we produced it, and then we had a dialogue on how their view in Yolo County is different than the national view. And we talked about how it's important for them to be engaged. What we're proud about is we've also engaged with the university, and in fact, 2020, UC Davis got a national award for having the highest percentage increase between 2016 and 2020. So competing against 300 other universities, UC Davis was awarded. So when they got it, I got a call from the chancellor's office, you got to come, we got to celebrate this huge award. So we've tried a multi-tiered approach, and in fact, this year, I want to give another shout out, but this is to the Haas Junior Fund. They actually challenged us to try and see how we can increase voter turnout by looking at some of the communities that are often underrepresented in the voting base. So we're working on a project that we piloted in the primary, and now we're rolling it out on a larger scale where we're working with community-based organizations. And the neat thing about it is what we did is we focused on primarily the Spanish-speaking community because we wanted to be a little bit more focused in the primary. And we actually wanted to compare with some GIS mapping that we had, some neighborhoods that we know, we called them kind of low-performing communities that weren't really performing to the way they should in terms of voter turnout. And we compared a 2020 primary to the 2024 primary. Well, we know 2024 was a low turnout. What I'm excited to say in one of the neighborhoods we really focused on, you can see the difference in the turnout actually when we actually had people go door to door and engage from the community about importance of voting. In Yolo County, I'm very proud of the fact that even though it was not as high as we'd like, the statewide average was 35, and we've always hovered 3 to 4 to 5% above it. And that primary, we were 11%. We were 11% above the statewide average. So something is happening. I think it's a combination of things, good measures that people want to get engaged with. We're reaching out in the community in ways that haven't been done before. We're engaging young people. And I think you have to do as many strategies as you can and see which one actually hits, because you don't know, and try and continue to build on that positive momentum. So those are some of the strategies we've been using in Yolo County.
I have the great fortune of being in a county that has very high voter turnout compared to sort of other California counties. I think we're usually in the top 5. I nudged Eric a little bit when Mindy was showing her map of turnout. I'm like, look at how dark Nevada County is. But I mean, as always, there's room for improvement. So, I consider myself as the administrator to be, the resource for all groups that actually do go out to, sort of the constituencies and, sort of give information and tools. As a Voters' Choice Act county, we have a language accessibility and voting accessibility advisory committees. And those committees are made up of community partners where, we not only, try to address their questions and try to, sort of get feedback and improvements for how we can, sort of meet voters where they're at, but also give all the folks, no matter, what community they're involved in or where they're coming from, the tools that they need to sort of get their constituents fired up. Whether that's talking to, sort of community groups. In fact, next week I'm going to one of the Rotaries to talk about elections and voting. We go to high schools and do pre-registration and talk to the students about what voting means to them and why they should pre-register. We go to the county fair and do, all kinds of tabling at events. But by and large in my county, this is a, sort of in-person, you get to meet the registrar and then, you can talk about elections and, get things like, the voter registration forms so you can sort of, get out, sort of registration, get out the vote. I always have an open door. And, I say, I'm in work pretty much all the time. If you want to come in and just, chat, be a sounding board, that's great. I think that, our community college has really responded to that. They have a working group over at Sierra College and invited the elections officials that are within that area to participate in a student voter engagement working group. There's, just so many things that we can do for you. I wish more people would come to us, and I think just sort of constantly reminding people, hey, there's an election. Hey, you're going to get a ballot. Hey, this is your opportunity and your window to have your voice heard. It is your choice whether to vote or not, but if you choose to, you are welcome here.
Mm-hmm. Thank you all so much for such an engaging conversation here. I want to turn it over to questions here. While I'm pulling this up, does anybody in the room have a question they want to ask our panelists? So at what point is citizenship status verified during the process when somebody is trying to register to vote?
Well, folks do sign under penalty of perjury that they are U.S. citizens. So that's the first and foremost element that's done. And of course, we do ask for, when they're first starting their registration, we do ask for their last 4 digits of their social security number or either a California identification number to be able to align that. But at the end of the day, the biggest factor is the penalty under perjury, right? Because you're saying that you are a U.S. citizen. And I think that's a kind of a major factor, because it's, for most people, when they see that, we've seen it in person, we're like, oh, I realize I can't do this.
Actually, I just wanted to also add to that, and this was something I learned from working on the motor voter programs with a lot of other advocacy groups. People who are non-citizens have a huge disincentive to register to vote. If you register to vote and you're not a citizen, you have committed a felony. And that is, you could end up in jail. You could end up, being separated from your family. I mean, it's a major crime. So while that is our primary point of enforcement is the penalty of perjury law, for the people that some folks are worried about, that is a huge disincentive to break that law, because for them, breaking that law means they could be forced to leave the United States. So it has happened that people who were not eligible to vote got registered. Just because someone is on the registration rolls doesn't mean they actually voted. And that's the other thing people need to realize. You might find in the voter registration list, and there was an example out of Oregon where they did find a number of people who were unintentionally registered to vote, but they found that only 9 of them actually had voted. So it is definitely something that is rare and is being blown up this election much more than the problem actually exists. I don't know, Jana, if you want to add anything about that.
So you did ask about Social Security, whether or not voter registrations are run through Social Security. There's a very few that actually have to go through their Social Security check. It's if you register to vote and you don't supply your driver's license, then you're asked to supply your last 4 of your Social Security number. There is a check that we do through Department of Motor Vehicles. That's how we actually run the check through, is to see if the last 4 digits associate with that name, right, in the date of birth. But if you've already done a driver's license and you put that on there, or you put the last 4, there's that only check is the only time we do that. But if you do neither of them, then of course you would be assigned, as Natalie was talking, a unique identifier. And then you would be indicated on your voter record that the first time that you went to register or you went to vote, that you have to show some form of ID to say who you actually are. So I think—
And you can't register online. I mean, you're going to have a paper aspect to your registration.
You would absolutely have to you'd have to print out the application, sign it, and mail it back. And it's all under penalty of perjury.
One question that we received here was, can you please discuss if it might help ballot rejection rates to integrate ballot track sign up into voter registration forms /COVR? What would this take to accomplish from a resource perspective?
Everybody, please sign up to get through ballot tracks so you can track your ballot. It's Where's My Ballot? It's on our Secretary of State's webpage. Since everybody is being mailed a vote by mail ballot, it's really good to sign up for that. So you will know when that ballot is being sent to you, when that ballot's received back in your county registrar or voter's office, and when that ballot has actually been accepted. And that's the same case as if you go to the polls. You will know that you'll get a notice from ballot tracks that you went to the polls and your ballot was accepted. So that's a way to make sure we can get everybody integrated. We would have to change some state law to have that as part of our voter registration online voter registration database, the ability to do that. So is that something that the legislature could look at? Absolutely, but we couldn't just do it without some legislation.
Mm-hmm. And just one more question here. Is it possible to get a proposal on the ballot to reverse voters' choice ballots?
I mean, anything's possible. It's very hard to qualify a ballot measure in California. Generally, you can't do it without having some sort of a paid campaign. The legislature is often tinkering with the Voters' Choice Act and those laws. What I wish would happen is that one of our board members is Tommy Gong, who's an election official in Contra Costa County, so I have to credit him for this. We were having a debate on my board about whether we should have, fewer days of early voting for Voters' Choice Act counties, and he said, if we just had enough state funding for all the counties to have vote centers and all those vote centers to be open for 10 days before the election day and for everyone to have the same access, then this becomes a non-issue and we could have more consistency and experiences for voters. So I really like that idea. I think we've been given a lot of false choices in California about having one system or another. We should have it all. We don't put up the barriers to democracy that we see other states do, but we also haven't created a clear road for everybody. And as Mindy's talked about and other people have spoken about today, trying to, and Eric as well, about the findings with the AVR, you know, we have to make sure that everybody feels equally invited and engaged in this state, because we don't see that right now. We can't leave it up to just political campaigns. And if every county had early voting, weekend voting, vote centers where didn't matter where you lived, you could vote anywhere in your county, I think we would see a much higher turnout and much less confusion for voters, which would be welcome.
If anyone else has questions, please ask them after, but otherwise, please thank you for the opportunity, and please join me in thanking our panelists.